This week's parsha is Parshas Emor. There's a lot in the parsha, but chapter 23, which is on page 683, is a section which deals with the holidays, the Jewish holidays. And anybody who attends synagogue regularly is familiar with this, because this is the Torah reading for the first 2 days of Sukkot, as well as the second day of Pesach. So this is read fairly frequently in the shul. And it's strange to talk about the holidays right now, which is not a holiday, but I'd like to talk about two holidays, two of the several holidays mentioned. And those are Rosh Hashanah, which is far off, and Shavuos, which is coming up. And the reason I mention these two is because these are the two holidays where the Torah makes no explicit statement as to why we celebrate those days. When it comes to Pesach, the connection between Pesach and the Exodus from Egypt is explicit. When it comes to Sukkot, the fact that Sukkot commemorates our having lived in the Sukkot, in the huts, in the desert, is also explicitly made. The significance of Yom Kippur is also clear in the Torah. It's the Day of Forgiveness, Day of Atonement. But exactly why Shavuos is a holiday and why Rosh Hashanah is a holiday is not explicitly explained. So I'd like to talk about these two. The Kli Yakar gives what I think is an unsatisfying explanation. He says, we all know that Rosh Hashanah is a holiday because it's the Yom Hadin. It's the Day of Judgment. Shavuos is a holiday because it's the day of the giving of the Torah. But the reality is that a person should not live his life as if judgment is limited to a specific day, or as if the giving of the Torah is limited to a specific day. As a person should live his life as if every day is the day of judgment. In other words, if you think of judgment being once a year, so you figure that I can slacken off. I'll get my act together when the day of judgment approaches. The person shouldn't live that way. A person should live every day with a consciousness and awareness of responsibility. And therefore, the Torah conceals the fact that there is a single day of judgment to give you the impression, it's a false impression, but it's an impression which is a useful impression, that every day is a day of judgment. As well, when it comes to Shavuos, so it's true that Torah was given on a specific day, because I'll tell us that really every day a Jew should look at Torah as if it's new, as if it's novel, as if it's fresh, and therefore to ascribe the giving of the Torah to a specific day also detracts from that idea of Torah being new and exciting every day of the year. So the Torah conceals this fact. That's the explanation which the Kli Yakar gives. To me, it seems that it's unsatisfying. I think we have to dig a little deeper to understand the significance.
If you make the same argument about freedom and Simcha, why should it be limited to one day?
Okay, I guess you could say that. Let's talk about Rosh Hashanah first. I'd like to point out that I believe that the Torah tells us why Rosh Hashanah is the Yom Tov. It's just that the Torah's reason for Rosh Hashanah is not the conventional wisdom. You look in the Chumash, it says, and this is verse 23. Vayidaber Hashem Moshe Lemor. God spoke to Moshe. Daber al bnei Yisrael Lemor. Speak to the Jewish people and tell them. B'chodesh Hashvi'i, on the 7th month, B'achod l'chodesh, on the 1st of the month, Yiyeh lochem Shabbason. It is a day of rest, Zichroin Trua, a day of remembrance through the sounding of the shofar. Mikra Kodesh. It is a declared holy day. So the Torah tells us why it's a holiday. It's a holiday because Zichroin Trua. It is a day of remembrance through the shofar. What does that mean? So let's understand it fundamentally. we know that in Rosh Hashanah, the service, the prayer service, incorporates three elements: Malchios, Zichronos, and Shofros. Verses of kingship, verses of remembrance, and verses that refer to the shofar. So the Gemara says that why do we recite verses of remembrance? In order that we should be remembered for good. That God's remembrance should be positive, so we recite verses of remembrance. Now, what is this remembrance? What does it mean on Rosh Hashanah there's remembrance? So we assume it means that it's a reference to the process of judgment itself. God recalls our actions. The entire year we do good things, bad things. So the entire year the deeds accumulate, and on Rosh Hashanah God remembers, God recalls everything we did, and that is the judgment itself. But from the Ramban's comment on this verse, we see that the Ramban did not understand the idea of remembrance that way. The Ramban brings the verse. It says that on the first day of the 7th month there is a remembrance, and the Ramban says, we don't know. Why do we need a remembrance? Why do we need a remembrance? Says the Ramban, but there's a clue. Because we'll read in a moment that 10 days later is the day of forgiveness, which is Yom Kippur. And therefore, undoubtedly, if there's a holiday immediately beforehand, that must be a day of judgment. Because there must be a day of judgment before the day of forgiveness. And now that we assume that the first day of the 7th month is the day of judgment, now we understand why we need the remembrance. Very cryptic comment to the Ramban. In other words, the remembrance itself is not the judgment. Because it's a day of judgment, that's why I need the remembrance. So what is the judgment and what is the remembrance? So we're going to explain this. Try to explain this. Let's tackle the words of the Ramban one step at a time. It says, because it is a day of forgiveness, therefore there must be a judgment that precedes. Now why is that? Why does that follow? Why is it that the 10th day of the 7th month is a day of forgiveness, so there must be a day of judgment beforehand? It must be that God takes note of our deeds. Well, the answer is very simple. Let's say I go over to you and say, please forgive me. Forgive me for what I've done. And you say, forgive him. Is that a real forgiveness? Let's say you have no clue what I'm asking forgiveness for. You don't recall my having done anything to offend you, to hurt you. So I ask forgiveness, and you'll give forgiveness. Is that a real forgiveness? It would seem to me that in order to give genuine forgiveness, you have to know what you're forgiving. If I would come to you and say, forgive the debt that I owe you, if you wouldn't know the size of the debt, are you forgiving $1? Are you forgiving $100? $1 million? $1 billion? I mean, you don't know. So, true forgiveness necessitates taking stock, taking account, making a determination exactly what the extent of the debt is, and then you forgive the debt. So therefore, says the Ramban, it's axiomatic. There can't be a day of forgiveness until there is a day of judgment. And therefore, if we know that on the 10th day of the 7th month, there's a day of forgiveness, and we know there's a holiday that comes 10 days before, it must be that that day is a day of judgment. It happens to be that the Gemara in Maseches Rosh Hashanah brings other proofs to this. That on the first day of the 7th month there is a judgment. But it's interesting, not from the Chumash, of course. The Chumash makes no explicit mention of that. But there are verses in Tehillim, other verses, which express this idea, that it's a day of judgment. But the Ramban understands it, that it's implicit in the text. If on the 10th day of the month there's a day of forgiveness, there must be a day of judgment which precedes. Once God makes an assessment, okay, this is what you've done, this is what you haven't done, these are the debts that you owe, then there can be forgiveness. Now God can forgive the debt. But first there has to be a determination, what is the debt? because it's the day of judgment, we need a remembrance. What does that mean? So what is the idea of remembrance? So let me bring it out with an illustration. I think I've used it before. We all like looking at family pictures. You know, when my daughter got married, so a family friend, in addition to the professional photographer who took his time getting the proofs to us, but a family friend took pictures on her own at the wedding. And the next morning, we had 300 pictures of the wedding the night before. You know, she took it to shoppers and she got it done with the all-night shoppers. And the next morning, we have a stack of photos of the wedding. And we looked at those photos. We examined every photo and who was there and who and what they did and where they sat. And it was just the night before. We couldn't remember. What's special about family pictures is that looking at pictures arouses the feelings of the moment. You have an emotional experience, it's a wedding, it's a joyous occasion. Great simcha, a little bit of pathos, you know, your child is grown up, moving out of the house. So there are very intense emotions. So when you look at the pictures, it arouses the same feelings that you had at that earlier moment. And that's very special. We want that very much. It's not enough just to remember, to recall. You know, we want that tangible image so that we can really relive the experience. The idea of zikaron is that there are certain things that we can do that arouse this type of remembrance on the part of God. Now, obviously, God doesn't forget anything. But in order for God to act upon His memories, there are things that we can do to arouse the zikaron, to arouse the remembrance. And we know, Chazal tell us, that the great merit of the Jewish people, which really puts us in good stead, is the merit of the Akedah, the merit of the great sacrifice that Avraham Avinu was willing to make. He was willing to sacrifice his beloved son. Ultimately, he brought a ram instead of the son. The ram's horn arouses the remembrance of that great merit. And we live off that. In the Chumash, the knife that Avraham was to use is called the ma'achelas, that which feeds. Now, why is a knife called a ma'achelas? Well, if you slaughter a live animal, now you can feed the animal to the people meant to eat it, so it's called the feeder, the knife that feeds. But Rashi says here there's a double meaning. It's called the ma'achelas because we eat the merit of the Akedah. We live, we thrive on the merit of that sacrifice. Because when the divine judgment would turn against us, it's the merit of our great-great-great-grandfather Abraham which puts us in good stead. That's the zikaron, that's the remembrance. And God tells us below the shofar in Rosh Hashanah, in order to arouse the remembrance of the Akedah. Now, you might ask a question, okay, I understand why we like looking at pictures and we like things to remind us. Does God really need that? So I would say that maybe we can add one dimension to it. We want to invoke the merit of our forefathers. Now, this is part of God's way, the idea of schus avos, that we can count on the merit of our forebears. Now, it would seem to me that there is at least one necessary condition for that. It would have to be that we recognize that what our forefathers did was a correct thing to do, and it was a great thing to do. Our appreciation of it seems to be the most necessary condition for us to invoke the merit. I'll give you this past Rosh Hashanah, I was looking for ideas. I speak Rosh Hashanah services. I wanted some ideas, so I looked on the internet to find what other rabbis were saying. So I stumbled across a comment that a Reform rabbi made. This was her Rosh Hashanah sermon. it was an attack on Avraham Avinu. It was a critique of Avraham Avinu for performing the Akedah, that he should have been bold, he should have stood up to God and said, no, I'm not going to do this, it's unjust, it's immoral. And that was her Rosh Hashanah sermon. It was a provocative critique of Avraham Avinu. Okay, that was her subject. I don't know whether it was well received or not, but one thing I can tell you, that if she was hoping to count on the merit of the Akedah, I think she shot herself in the foot. Right? You can't come to God and say, Ribono shel Olam, give me a good year in the merit of the Akedah, if you yourself say that the Akedah was a crime, it was a sin, it was a form of child abuse, whatever you would say. You can't then turn around and say that Ribono shel Olam, give me a good year in the merit of the great sacrifice of Avraham Avinu. The binding, when Abraham bound his son Isaac.
With Isaac.
Right. So that's the first thing we have to do. We have to stand before God and say that what Avraham Avinu did was a great thing. It was a great deed. It was an act of supreme sacrifice, and it was justified morally. No. Someday, if you want, we can discuss it and see how to answer the various objections that have been raised to what Avraham Avinu did. But this is the assumption that we make, that it was perfectly justified, and it was correct, and it was praiseworthy, and therefore it's a merit that we count on. So when we blow the shofar, we're saying that. When we come before God and make the claim that we want God to help us and to give us a good year in the merit of the Akedah, we're saying that the Akedah is something which is noble, and we meet the necessary condition for God using that merit to put us in good stead. So this is the Zikaron, this is the remembrance. So now we understand the Ramban. The Ramban says like this. We know that Rosh Hashanah is the day of judgment. In theory, if we're being judged, we should have to stand on our own 2 feet. Right? We should have to give an accounting of our own deeds. It shouldn't be a question of what our forefathers did. It says, did we live up to our obligations? However we define them. I don't know what God expects of any one person. Undoubtedly, he has different expectations of everybody, but a person should have to stand before God and say, listen, this is what's expected of me. This is the extent to which I met those obligations. Yeah. And you're on your own. That's what I would have thought. Comes to Ribono shel Olam, and he says, it's a day of judgment, and I want you to merit a good judgment. I want you to win your case. So what I'm going to do is, I'm going to make this a day of Zikaron, a day of remembrance. This is Remembrance Day. This is the day that God is going to recall all the acts of our forefathers. What Avraham Avinu did, what Yitzchak Avinu did. And that these great sources of merit should stand for us on our day of judgment.
He's going to look at the family pictures.
Look at the family pictures, exactly. And we're going to bring the album. We blow the shofar, so we're opening the album, and God sees these great merits, and he's filled with all those warm feelings for Avraham Avinu and for Yitzchak and for their descendants, and thereby we are zocha, we merit, we win our case. That's what the Ramban says. The Ramban says that the reason God made Rosh Hashanah a Yom HaZikaron, a day of remembrance, is because since it's the Yom HaDin, that's established. The fact that 10 days later is their forgiveness. This must be a Yom HaDin. If it's a Yom HaDin, we need merit. We need merit. So God said, let it be a Yom HaZikaron. Let it be a day of remembrance. Now let me tell you an amazing thing that dawned on me. You know, we think of Rosh Hashanah as being a Yom HaDin, Day of Judgment. And we tend to think the conventional wisdom is that's why it's a holiday. Does that make sense? Should we celebrate the fact that it's a Yom HaDin? Now, and obviously, we shouldn't ignore the fact that it's a Yom HaDin. Obviously, we have to approach it with seriousness and preparation. But is that a reason to celebrate? Because we know in Rosh Hashanah, it's like every other Yom Tov, there's a mitzvah of simcha. There's a mitzvah of joy. Now, admittedly, the joy of Rosh Hashanah is not the same as the joy of Purim. Right? We understand. In other words, every day has its own modality. Now, we don't celebrate Rosh Hashanah the way we celebrate Purim, but Rosh Hashanah also is a day of joy. The prayers are very serious, but after the prayers, in a mood of great optimism, we go home, we celebrate with a festive meal. It's a day of joy, Rosh Hashanah. I'll tell you a story that when I was a young fellow, and I was in Eretz Yisrael, so I was very friendly with the son of Rabbi Bullman, Zecher Tzadik Levracha. Rabbi Bullman was a very unusual person. And I was invited to the Suda, to the meal, the first night of Rosh Hashanah, Rabbi Bullman's house. So I was there for the Suda. It was very nice. And in their building, their apartment building, there was a Sheva Brachas on Rosh Hashanah. The young couple had gotten married a few days before, and this was the week of celebration. So that normally you have a very festive meal. Rosh Hashanah wasn't so. So they asked if people would come for dessert afterward, and they would say the Sheva Brachas. So we went down. Rabbi Bullman, his son, myself, we went down to the Sheva Brachas. These were serious people. So Rosh Hashanah, but it wasn't a frivolous day. They were sitting there. No one was talking. It was quiet. You could hear a pin drop. Right? They were sitting. It's quiet. The wedding celebration. And after about 10 minutes, Rabbi Bullman says, what a glorious simcha. The celebration of Rosh Hashanah is different than the celebration of Pesach, Shavuos, or Purim, to give an extreme example. But it's also a day of simcha. So why is it a simcha? Why is it a day of celebration? Is it a celebration because it's a day of judgment? I mean, should judgment call for a celebration? As God tells you, today you're going to be judged. I'm going to review your entire year. Everything you did, everything you said, everything you thought. And your reaction is, okay, let's have a party. Doesn't make sense. And it dawned on me that that's correct. It's not a yontif because it's the Yom Hadin. It's a yontif because it's the Yom HaZikaron. It's a yontif because it's the Day of Remembrance. That's what we're celebrating. We're not celebrating the fact that we're judged. We're celebrating the fact that God in His great love said, if this is the day of judgment, I'm going to see to it that the sides are stacked in your favor. By making this a Yom HaZikaron, making this a day of remembrance, a day of remembering the great deeds. That's a cause of celebration. It says, what a glorious day, a day that God Himself recalls all the great merit of Avraham Avinu, Yitzchak Avinu, in order that we should merit our judgment. And of course, when you study the symbolism of the shofar, you find that the shofar reminds God of other things too. Not just the Akedah. The shofar is present in other junctures in history. For example, Reb Sadia Gaon points out, the shofar also relates to the giving of the Torah. The giving of the Torah, because the shofar was present at Mount Sinai. So when we sound the shofar in Rosh Hashanah, it also reminds God of the merit of the Jewish people that they voluntarily accepted the Torah. They voluntarily accepted the Torah. That's a tremendous merit. That the Jewish people, every last person, stood at Mount Sinai and said, we accept the Torah. That's what the shofar reminds God of as well. That's a little closer in history than Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. And there's also something else. The Sadia Gaon says that the shofar will also be present in the Messianic age. So it's a reminder to God of the future as well. Now this is a very interesting thing. You see, our memories, human memories, are only of the past. We cannot remember the future. Didn't happen yet. Right? We only remember the past. Right? But to God, who sees the future as vividly as He sees the past. Now this is an interesting thing. Let me just point out. If you study the works of the prophets, the Nevi'im, you see a very interesting thing, that very often there are prophecies of the future that are written in past tense, as if they already happened. This is a biblical convention. It's called in Hebrew the Avar Nevu'i, the prophetic past tense, which is a convention. Sometimes you have a prophecy of the future which is written as if it already happened. So why is that? The idea is because to the prophet who was given a vision of the future, that vision of the future is as sharp as a vision of the past. Right? On the part of God, there's no difference in the past and the future. So when the God remembers our good deeds, it's not just He remembers the good deeds that have already taken place. He remembers the good deeds that will take place. That means like this. You think about it for a second. We live our lives. And it could be that this particular moment is a low point. Nothing very special about what I'm doing today. But in the past, there were shining hours. And undoubtedly in the future, there'll be such hours. So when God judges me, He doesn't only look at my present. He looks at my past, my future, the past of my ancestors, the future of my descendants. And I'm a link in that chain. And therefore, as opposed to a judgment which would focus only on myself and only on the here and now, God's judgment takes the memories into account, the memories of the past, the memories of the future, those of my forebears, those of my successors. And accordingly, I merit in judgment, even if otherwise I would not have. That's a cause of celebration. And that is the zichron trua. That is the remembrance which is aroused by the shofar. And that's what the Torah says, that on the first day of the 7th month, it is a zichron trua. It is a day of remembrance, and that remembrance is aroused by the sound of the shofar. And that's why it's a holiday. The Torah tells me explicitly it's a holiday. It's true. The Torah doesn't tell me why I need this remembrance. As the Ramban says, I need this remembrance because it's the day of judgment. But that's why I need the remembrance. But why it's a holiday is because of the remembrance. Question?
Sorry. Does God have to remember, or do we have to remember?
No. The idea of remembrance is that there are acts that we do which cause God to act upon these memories. Because God doesn't forget anything, but He would not act upon them. They would not become elements of the judgment. They would not be considerations in the judgment unless we did something to, in a sense, bring those memories forward. And that's what the shofar accomplishes. And that's why it's a holiday. That's why it's a great day. And I'll tell you something more than that. One of the great questions about Rosh Hashanah really is this, that Rosh Hashanah should be a universal holiday. When you think about it. Because the other holidays relate to events in Jewish history. Pesach to the Exodus, Shavuos to the giving of the Torah, Sukkot, etc. Purim, Hanukkah, certainly so. But Rosh Hashanah is the day of judgment for all mankind. The Mishnah says, Maseches Rosh Hashanah, that everybody, Jew, Gentile, every human being is judged on Rosh Hashanah. So if Rosh Hashanah was a holiday because it's the day of judgment, it should be a universal holiday. And yet, only Jews celebrate it. And it's an interesting thing, I have this feeling every year when I go to shul, I walk to shul on Rosh Hashanah morning, and, there's traffic, and the stores are open, and everyone is going about doing their thing. And I say to myself, do they know what is happening today? All these people that are driving here and there and working, opening their businesses, going to their offices, if they would have a clue of what is happening today, would they be doing this? Would they be going to work? Would they be running their businesses, driving? I mean, wouldn't they feel the need somehow to respond, react to what's taking place in heaven? That's an intriguing thing. But it seems it's only a holiday for Jews. Why is that? The answer is very simple. Because it's not a holiday because it's the day of judgment. It's the day of judgment for everybody. But it's the Yom HaZikaron for the Jewish people. Because the great merit that is recalled is the merit of Avraham, the merit of Yitzchak, the merit of the Jews who received the Torah, the merit of the Jews who will meet Mashiach. So it's true that it's the Yom HaDin for everybody, but it's the Yom HaZikaron for the Jewish people. That's why it's only a celebration for the Jewish people.
So it may not be a yontif, if you will, for the Gentiles, but why didn't the Torah bring or suggest that maybe they should have a consciousness?
They probably should. If they would know what's good for them, they would. But it still wouldn't be a yontif.
No.
It wouldn't be like our Rosh Hashanah. Maybe they should be serious and maybe pray and
all the more so
repent.
because it's not stacked on
Right.
everything.
But a holiday wouldn't be. A holiday wouldn't. So this is an amazing thing. So in fact, the Torah does tell me explicitly why Rosh Hashanah is a holiday. It tells me it's Zikra and Trua. That's why it's a holiday. The background, why I need this remembrance, that the Torah doesn't tell me. But what it is, that the Torah does explicitly. So really, this is the case. So Rosh Hashanah is not a problem at all. Rosh Hashanah, if you read the verses carefully, the Torah really is explicit why we celebrate Rosh Hashanah. I think it's a new insight as to the very meaning of Rosh Hashanah. Shavuos is a harder problem. Shavuos is depicted as an agricultural festival. As we know that between Pesach and Shavuos is the harvest season. The new barley is harvested in the earlier part of this span. The new wheat is harvested in the later part of this span. On the second day of Pesach, we bring the Karban HaOmer, which is an offering from the new barley. On Shavuos, we bring the Shtei HaLechem, which is an offering of the new wheat. And we count. We count from the Karban HaOmer to the Karban Shtei HaLechem, 49 days. And that 49-day span is the span between the barley offering and the wheat offering. So it seems that the whole significance of the holiday is agricultural. We, of course, don't live on the farm. So we think of it differently, as Shavuos being the day that we receive the Torah, and yet the Torah does not make that connection explicitly. I think that the answer to this question, like if the Torah was given on that day, why don't we make a mention of it? I think is really the same answer as why the Torah does not make the connection to judgment on Rosh Hashanah. Could God expect us to celebrate the giving of the Torah? Let's think about it for a moment. Right? God makes demands of us. And the verse in Psalm says, Mishamayim hishmata din. From heaven you made the law known. So God laid down the law on Shavuos. Now, how are we meant to react to that? It happens to be, right, that the Jewish response to din, to the law, is that the law is the most wonderful thing possible. There is nothing which is more beautiful, nothing which is more sweet, nothing which is more pleasurable, nothing which is more meaningful than the law. To us, the law is like honey. It's just the greatest conceivable bliss is the law. Torah Hashem Tmima, the Torah of God is perfect. Meshivas Nafesh restores the soul. Eidos Hashem Namona, the testimony of God is true. Machkimas Pesi, it gives intelligence to the fools. Mesukim Midvash V'Nofes Sufim, it's more sweet than honey and the dripping honeycombs. It's glorious. And that is always how Jews related to the Torah. And if you really want to read how David HaMelech praised the Torah, there are two psalms in particular. One we say every Shabbos, from which those verses were quoted, and that is Psalm 19. And then if you want to look at an expanded version of that, look at Psalm 119, which is 176 verses long, longest psalm in the entire book, which is David HaMelech's song, love song to the Torah. That's how Jews always reacted. And this is important to know, by the way, that as opposed to the view of the New Testament, which takes the position that the only thing that the law accomplishes is to make us feel guilty. Right? To us, the law is our greatest joy, our greatest pleasure. But could God demand that of us? Could God say, I insist, I demand of you that you see it as such? It would seem to me that this is something that we have to come to on our own. It can't be something which is demanded of us. God can't say, I'm going to give you beatings and you're going to like it. The Torah is the law, and not everyone will react to the law as if it's something to celebrate. So God himself says, I'm not going to demand of you that you celebrate the law. Shavuos, there are other things to celebrate. It's not a cultural holiday. The barley harvest, the wheat harvest, you can celebrate. But the Jews, on their own, took the observance of Shavuos and they transformed it. And they said, we're going to celebrate barley. We're going to celebrate wheat. So this is the day we received the Torah. That's what we're going to celebrate. So it was the collective consciousness, the genius of the Jewish people, which transformed Shavuos from an agricultural holiday to a Torah holiday. But this is because of their appreciation of the Torah. Right? This is not something that God could have demanded. In the same way that God doesn't expect us to celebrate Rosh Hashanah because it's the day of judgment, only because it's the day of remembrance. Because God cannot demand of us that we celebrate Shavuos because it's the day of Torah, only because it's the day of the wheat and barley. Right? That's something that everyone will agree is worth celebrating. But the Jews on their own said no. They said that it may be you're telling us to celebrate the harvest, but we are going to celebrate the Torah. The Torah to us is more precious than the harvest. And therefore it was the collective genius of Klal Yisrael. Chazal say that if the Jews aren't prophets, at least they're the sons of prophets, that totally transformed the nature of the holiday to the extent that its original association is almost forgotten. There's almost no connection, at least in our thinking, to the agricultural roots of Shavuos. To us, it is a celebration of the Torah itself. And all our customs and all our practices and all our thinking and the speeches we hear and the things we learn all take this for granted, that we are commemorating the giving of the Torah, because the Torah to us is something worth celebrating. God does not demand it of us. Now let me just give you an illustration of this, how even the halacha says such a thing. Let's say, for example, a person made a vow that I am not going to derive benefit from a certain object. That's called a neder. A neder is a vow where a person says that this object is to me as if it was sanctified. I'm not allowed to have any benefit from it. So let's say a person, there's a nice chocolate cake on the counter, and I'm tempted to eat it, and I can't use the calories, or I could use not having the calories. So I make a vow. To me, this cake is as if it was sanctified. So that's a binding vow. I'm not allowed to eat the cake, as if it was an object of sanctification. Now, that means I can't derive any benefit from it. I can't eat it, I can't use it, can't sell it, because a thing which is sanctified is not only forbidden to be eaten, it can't be used, you can't derive any benefit from it. Let's say the object is a mitzvah object. I say, I'm not going to have any benefit from this esrog. The esrog I need on Sukkot. Or I'm not going to have any benefit from this shofar. Or any benefit from this pair of tefillin. Can I use it for the mitzvah? Says the Talmud, yes. Because we have a rule, mitzvahs lav lehanais nitnu. Mitzvahs were not given for pleasure. The use of an object for a mitzvah is not considered a pleasure. So I can't have pleasure from this thing. I can use it for the mitzvah. So I can use the esrog for the mitzvah. That's not called deriving pleasure from the esrog. I can use the tefillin for the mitzvah. That's not called deriving pleasure from the tefillin. I can use the lulav. That's not called deriving pleasure from the lulav. What do you mean? Is that really true? I mean, ask a Jew who takes his mitzvah seriously, and they'll tell you there's no bigger joy than when it comes to Sukkot and he takes his lulav and there are people that have an attachment to their lulav. It's like a romantic attachment. For a week, this is their partner. The answer is very simple. That it's true. From our perspective, we've come to love this. But the question is not our feelings about it. The question is that if this really was a sanctified object, what type of pleasures would God forbid? What would be a pleasure by God's standard? So when God speaks to us, he says, eating is a pleasure. Selling to earn money is a pleasure. Using it for mitzvah isn't a pleasure. I don't expect you, I don't demand of you to enjoy this. It's a command. You have to do it. Right? I don't insist that you enjoy it at the same time. If you enjoy it at the same time, that's your business. But God does not demand that of us. And therefore, in terms of the halacha, it's not considered a forbidden benefit. Now, this is an amazing thing, that God says, listen, there are things you have to do. I don't expect you to enjoy them. By the way, parents would be well advised to follow this example. Right? In other words, we tell our children to do things, right? And we are upset that they don't enjoy doing them. Because why should they enjoy doing them? Right? Because I want them to do it, they should enjoy it? Why should they enjoy it? You ask your kids to wash the dishes, right? And you're shocked they don't enjoy doing it. How can that be? I asked them they don't enjoy doing it. No, there's no reason they should enjoy it. Just because I asked them they should enjoy it. They have to do it whether they enjoy it or not. Right? You have to listen to your parents. Right? But I shouldn't be surprised that they don't, give me more dishes. Let me do more. Well, what's the surprise? There are things you have to do whether you like it or not. Right? Your parents give you instructions, you have to do it. Because if they would enjoy it, that's a fringe benefit. Kol hakavod, I'm glad you enjoy it. But that has nothing to do with just because I commanded, they have to enjoy it. Even God doesn't demand that of us.
Oh.
God doesn't say that you have to enjoy it. God says you have to do it. It's good for you. You enjoy it, you don't enjoy it, what difference does it make? You have to do it. But the fact is that a Jew does enjoy it. And he loves it. And it's precious. And it's valuable to him. And it's worth celebrating. That's what Shavuos is all about. Shavuos is a transformation. Shavuos we celebrate in a manner that God himself would not demand of us. God would not demand of us that we celebrate the Torah. Because from God's perspective, this is an imposition. This is not making demands of you. You have to do it. I have no grievance if you find it difficult or you find it unpleasant. You have to do it anyway. But the Jew says, no, this is beautiful, this is meaningful, this is sweet. And that's why he celebrates it. And that's why Shavuos, the fact that Shavuos is associated with the Torah, to me, it seems that it's not that this is what the Torah meant when it gave the holiday of Shavuos. This is what the collective genius of Klal Yisrael did to Shavuos. It transformed the very nature of Shavuos to be a celebration of something that God himself wouldn't demand of us. Now, there is an interesting parallel to this. Very interesting thought that the Barditchever says, but I think what I'm saying goes even farther than what the Barditchever says. He makes a very interesting observation that in the Torah, the holiday that we call Pesach is always referred to as Chag HaMatzos, the holiday of the unleavened bread. And we always call it Pesach. So the question is, how do you account for that difference? So he says like this. He says that we observe the holiday in praise of God. God observes the holiday in praise of the Jewish people. Whereas Pesach refers to the fact that God passed over the Jewish homes the night before the Exodus and spared the Jewish homes. So we observe the holiday of Pesach in gratitude and in praise of God for this wonderful miracle. So accordingly we call it Pesach, Passover. It says, what does God demand of us? When God says celebrate Pesach, he's celebrating something else. He's saying that what is special about this holiday is that the Jews went into the desert without provisions. All they had to take with them was matzah. And they left Egypt on faith. They put their trust in me. And that's praiseworthy for the Jewish people, that's what God calls the holiday of Matzah. In other words, there's an asymmetry between God's holiday and our holiday, right? God celebrates our sacrifice, our devotion. And we celebrate God's devotion. I'm thinking a step further. I'm saying is that when it comes to Shavuos, our Shavuos and God's Shavuos are two different pages entirely. God is telling us, listen, I would like you to celebrate the harvest. It's great, you have a harvest, there's abundance, there's a bounty. That's worth celebrating. And we tell God, we're not interested in that.
Is the farmer interested?
We're not interested in bread.
Is the farmer interested?
Not compared to Torah. It's just not important. By comparison. I mean, it's important. But it's not as important. For the Jew is celebrating the fact it's the day of giving of the Torah. That's something which is special. And that really is, I think, the significance of the fact that the Torah doesn't make this connection explicitly. God doesn't demand it of us. This is something that we came to understand on our own. Now, we're holding in the weeks of Sfira. And obviously, these are weeks of preparation. And how are we meant to prepare for the receiving of the Torah? We pointed out in the past, just bears repeating, that I think there are two preparations we have to make. And let me bring it out this way. You know, when a person is called to the Torah in the synagogue, so there's the blessing which is said before the Torah reading, and there's a blessing which is said after the Torah reading. And if you've ever been to a bar mitzvah where the young boy is inexperienced, this is his first time being called to the Torah perhaps, so he can easily confuse the two blessings. He might get mixed up and say the second blessing first and the first blessing second. So we have to understand why the blessings are different. The first blessing is Asher Bach Arbonu Mikol Amim. God chose us from among all the nations and gave us the Torah. The second blessing is Asher Nasan Lanu Torah Semas. You gave us a Torah which is true. The Chaye Olam Nata B'Sochenu, and you planted for us the pathway to eternal life. These are the two blessings. Now, why do you say the one before and the other after? So I once heard a very beautiful mashal from Rabbi Simcha Wasserman, blessed memory. He said like this. He gave an illustration. Imagine a person gives you a present. The present is wrapped, ribbon, bow, beautiful paper, gives you the present. So you're certainly going to thank him. You have to thank him. You don't know what's in the box. What are you thanking him for? What did he give you? Okay, let's assume he didn't give you an exploding pressure cooker. But what do you think? You don't know what you got. You're thanking him for the fact that he is giving you a present, whatever the present is. Right? The fact that he's giving you a present, that itself is worthy of your gratitude. Now you take the box home, you open the wrapping, the ribbon, and you discover it's something exquisite, just what you always wanted. Just what you always wanted. And I'm always reminded, whenever I mention something you always wanted, that when heads of state used to meet with Jewish leaders, so the traditional gift that Jewish leaders gave to heads of state was a Sefer Torah. Kings, they would give a Sefer Torah to the kings. When Chaim Weizmann, first president of Israel, came and met President Truman first time, he brought him a Sefer Torah. And he presented the Torah to Harry Truman. Harry Truman didn't know what to do with it, kind of held it awkwardly, and he said, gee, just what I always wanted. But in any case, so you open the box and it is exactly what you always wanted. So it certainly would be appropriate to call the person again to thank him. You already thanked him the first time, but the first time you thanked him for a gift, but now that you see what the gift is, you have to thank him for the gift too. So when you're called to the Torah, you haven't read the Torah yet. You don't know what's there. You haven't read anything. But you know that that God gave you a gift, a precious gift. You don't know how precious. You don't know anything about the content of Torah. But the mere fact that God selected you as a member of the Jewish people from among all the nations to receive this gift, that's something which is worth thanking God for. Therefore, the blessing before you read the Torah makes no statement about the Torah itself, how truthful it is and how beautiful it is. It simply says, Asher bachar banu mikol amin, you chose us from among all the nations, and you gave us the Torah. That's the initial thanks. Even before you read, you don't have to read anything. Right? Before you read, you reflect on this idea that God chose us from among all the nations and gave us this gift of Torah. Now you read from the Torah. You don't read a big section, a few verses, but that sample gives you a clue as to the value of the entire thing. So now you have to thank God again. Asher nasan lanu Torahs emes. You gave us a Torah which is true. B'chaye olam nata b'suchenu, and you planted among us the key to eternal life. Now that I've read even a small section from the Torah, I see what it is. I see its truth. I see its utility, its usefulness, what it can give me, grant me eternal life. I have to thank God a second time. I think this is what we have to do. I think we have to impress two ideas upon ourselves. Number one is the idea of the tremendous privilege to have been chosen to receive the Torah. It's a privilege. You know, many people look at Torah as a burden, but the truth is, a person who is a true student of Torah and a true practitioner of Torah doesn't come to that conclusion. Comes to the conclusion that it is a tremendous privilege, a tremendous honor to have received such a Torah. That's the first thing we have to work on. If we're going to prepare ourselves for Shavuos, to relive the Kabbalah of Torah, that's the first thing we have to impress upon ourselves, this sense of immense privilege. Asher bachar banu mikol ha'amim. We were chosen from among all the nations. And then secondly, we have to reflect on Torah itself, what Torah gives us, the guidance it gives us, the insight it gives us, the wisdom it gives us. That's something which is a different issue. It's not just a question of privilege, but the substance of Torah, what it means for us, how it gives us the ability to cope with all the ups and downs of life and all the problems and all the issues and guides us to correct values and refinement of personality and meaningful life. That's the second thing. If we reflect on these two ideas, then comes through us, we'll be ready to accept it, the Torah again, renew our acceptance wholeheartedly.